My session is a little bit shorter than the others, so I just want to go ahead and jump right into it. And as you can see from our screen, I will be talking about 3 tips for engaging reading at home. Now, this overall session itself is going to be focusing on the third party of educational learning. Now, we usually talk about we talk about teachers, we talk about learners, but we also want to make sure that we're supporting the parents at home too. Now, to be honest, parent support has always been there in the past. But recently, through our current situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen a huge increase of parental support, their input, and also their own interest of supporting their young learners, their children, not just in the classroom, but also making sure that they're able to provide the right encouragement at home to it too. So what I am going to be speaking about is focusing on the parental support and how teachers, educators working in public schools or private sectors can give information and support to the parents they're dealing with as the teachers are working with their children in the classroom. So, as we're focusing on our overall theme of Oxford Day Online, I really want to make sure that our session is going to be focusing on the beginning and young learners. And we're going to be taking a look at not just the primary learners, but looking at the pre-primary learners as well. And this is going to be focusing on more of the 4, 5, 6-year-olds, possibly 3, but hopefully a lot of these skills and these tips can also be applied to any learners, not just in English, but also using their home tongue and trying to bring that interest of reading to home. Now, I do want to first off by stating that there are reading benefits across the board for all learners at any age. This is something that is very, very difficult to challenge. We all know why reading is important. Now, we can also state that reading is connected to the language skills, either their home tongue, their native language, or a foreign language too. Now, the session today is not explaining why reading is important. We already understand that. We all have a very clear background of why reading impacts language growth and acceleration. But what I do want to focus is how we can provide this right support. And it's not, as I mentioned earlier, not just with the primary students, but also our pre-primary children too. So like we said earlier, the kindergartners before first grade. So we're going to try to make sure that we're giving the right support and structure for the parents to really, really bring this educational benefits to the home environment as well. So I do want to go over quickly what we'll be discussing in our session for today. The first point is really going to be trying to set the proper expectations for our parents. How can the teachers reinforce the support and growth to parents dealing with reading at home? And of course, like our title states, we're going to be going into and exploring 3 different tips that our parents can do to help this experience to be easier, more educational, but at the same time, more beneficial in a more of a fun, positive way. And of course, we're going to do a quick wrap-up at the very end too. So if we jump right in, talking about the parent expectations, I really think there are 2 main focus areas that we can really show a lot of support to our parents is. The first one being, if they are not ELT teachers, that is okay. I found it very interesting before my session, Mark actually did talk about this. Yes, there are parents who are teachers, and there are parents who have that ELT background. But to be really, really focused on the majority of other parents, they're not teachers, they don't have the professional development or professional training that we've received in the past, but this is not a bad thing. Even though parents are not ELT teachers, they're still teachers of life, teachers of experience. And this really works in to the confidence of the parents and the learning support that they're showing with their children at home. So a lot of parents that talk to me not only in Korea, but the other countries that I am able to work with, they have this feeling that since they're not professional teachers, they're not going to be able to give a positive impact to their children at home. And this is completely false. Even though a parent is not professionally a teacher, they can still have this support and show this encouragement at home too. Now the second point that I do want to talk about is, even if the English is not perfect, that is okay as well. Now, as a personal experience, I am a United States born American, but my parents are Korean. And even though I currently live in Seoul, South Korea, I was born and raised in the United States. My parents immigrated from Korea to the States in the early 70s, and they brought their interest of education and the importance of reading through the immigration process. And of course, by no fault of their own, their English skill was not that strong. Now, fortunately, many parents during that age group have a much stronger appreciation, awareness, and exposure to English now compared to back in the 70s. But even if your English is not perfect, there are many ways that we can still support this learning environment through reading at home to it too. Like we said earlier, reading does not only impact English language skills, but it also improves and shows successfulness through any language skill. Even their home language or a mixture of both is okay to do. So if many parents come up to you as an educator and they have that lack of confidence or of not being a perfect English speaker, that is completely fine, and they can still use these strategies and tips to help support their children at home too. Now, as we're looking at this proper setup, we also want to make sure that we're giving our tips in a very simple and a practical way. Now, for many of the professionals out there today, these tips may be second nature to us. But once again, please remind us ourselves that we're focusing and working with parents and members of the English community that may not have this experience to it too. So we want to make sure that the support is very simple, it's very practical, and very clear on the approach and of the how we can do it with our children at home. Now the first tip is making sure that we have the right environment. Now what we mean by the right environment is trying to make reading a fun activity, not a task or a chore. Now I mentioned this before, living and working in Korea. Korea has a very, very strong presence of English education. And this is actually all throughout the world. But what I've noticed in the Asian areas, reading ends up being more of an academic approach. Now, what we want to do is we don't want to take away the fun and the enjoyment part of it too. So as a parent, we want to make sure that we're allowing our students to enjoy reading. And one step is allowing our students and our own children to choose their own books. Now, as you can see in this screen, choosing a book has many benefits in the way that it generates more personal interests. And this option of choice really enhances decision-making processes in the future. Now, to be honest, many parents, I don't know any parent that has a full library at their house. And I mean, at most I've seen is probably 50 to 60 books and readers at home that they can choose and pick and match with. But that is actually still a lot. So even if you are looking at a limited selection of only 10, 15, maybe even smaller amount of books, we can still do this option of choice for our students at home. Now, for example, we're looking at our reading stars. Just for an example today, hopefully you can see that I do have some readers in front of us. And even selecting these 4 pictures by their covers, we're allowing our students and children to have that independent choice of choosing what they like. Maybe if they're looking for something that's going to be more talking about cars, a little bit more of a stronger, more of like a louder kind of reading environment, then we can look at the books itself that have the engines, the trucks itself to it too. Or if there is a character, personally, I like boots. And if your child likes the Boots character, then they'll be able to choose a book that works with them if Boots is a reoccurring character and which they really enjoy too. So having this option, even if you have a limited amount of books, is still allowing our students, our children, to be able to have that power of choice. And many times, because they like that character, they'll choose to reread a book over and over again. What we also want to do is, by setting the right environment, this comes from making reading a part of daily life. Now, when I was growing up, I was born and raised in Kansas. When I was growing up, there was a program in school that was called DEAR, D-E-A-R. And this was a reading activity that my parents picked up and used at home too. Now, DEAR stands for Drop Everything and Read. So our teachers would just call it out, and then they would say, "Dear, dear, dear," and then wherever we were at, we had to stop and then find a corner and start reading for about 10 or 15 minutes. We did the same thing at my house. My mom would say, "Dear," and I would grab a book, read in a corner, grab a pillow, and for about 5 to 10 minutes, it can be any duration, we're trying to make that a part of our daily lives. Now, it doesn't have to be that exciting as a DEAR program, but we want to make sure that we're trying to reinforce that reading at home is a shared activity. And by doing this, being part of daily life, we also want to make sure we are referencing stories or characters in basic conversation. If your student really, really likes Harry Potter or Boots, you can ask them, "Oh, what would Harry Potter or what would Boots do in this situation?" or "How would they respond?" Either way, we're trying to make the setting as consistent as possible. My parents worked all day. My father was always out. My mother was also out until the evening. So our consistent reading time was right before I went to bed. Even if you're reading for 15, 20 minutes, trying to make sure that it's going to be you have set aside time to make sure that this reading part is a daily, consistent part of your child's daily life, weekly life, but making sure it is consistent so they can look forward to it and also count on it as a regular part of their schedule. Now, the second tip is we want to make sure that our reader is kept active. Now, by the word active, I don't mean physically moving around all the time or running or anything like that. You can do those types of TPR activities, but what I mean by keeping the reader active is either physically or mentally at the same time. And how we can do this is providing simple goals and tasks as we're reading along with them. Now, an example of this could be, if you look at our very first page, this is a very simple story reader, and you can see that only on one page, there's only one short phrase. So how can we keep them active? If you can read, I'm sorry, it's a little bit hard to see, but hopefully you can see that the sentence is, "My hat." So by keeping this simple goal active, not just reading it out loud, hopefully you can see that there is a different color letter highlighted within this sentence. And hopefully you can see that it is the letter H. So you can take this, the parent can take this as an H practice. Very, very simple. Now, the best part is, with all the resources that are now provided for our teachers, for our parents now, there are a lot of different ways that even if a parent is not able to think of this on the spot, nowadays, many books, actually all books from all publishers provide this parental support. So even if they don't see or recognize this, they can still match this up with a parent or teacher guide, or they can still use all the other resources available for them, such as audio, or even earlier, sometimes a video that if it is available for that book itself. So keeping the goal simple, we can say our focus is the H sound. So together with your child, they can say H, 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 or making the sounds and the letter correlation. So you can read together, hat, hat. And then you can have that echoing back and forth. But at the same time, we also want to give the opportunity for our children to speak up and show their answers to it too. So you can make this as a simple task. Okay, Bobby, if my child is Bobby, Bobby, what is another word that starts with H? And they can say anything. They can say hungry. They can say hippo. They can say hot. So you can bring these words into the reading task itself. And as you can see, I chose two different words, happy and hot. So you can make this as a repeating exercise or just a fun chant with it too. Hat. Happy, hot. And then you can take these words and put them all together. Hat, happy, hot. So you can see that it is a very simple activity. It's super easy to do, and it really gets your child mentally and physically, or mentally active as you're reading this portion as well. And then from here, like we said earlier, you can have the child be able to point, use their fingers, get that motion to it too. So I can say, okay, Bobby, we know the word hat now. Please point to hat. Where do you see hat? And of course, they can use their finger and actually put their finger on the object of hat or the word of hat. And then I can ask them, oh, but in our picture, we also have the letter H for the H sound. Can you please point and find that for us? And at that time, they can do a little bit of word searching, a little bit of picture searching, and then they can also point to the letter as well. So you can see that these simple tasks and goals do not always have to be academic. They don't always have to be serious or rigid. You can take these ideas and parents can integrate it into their reading in a very simple and easy way. Another activity, another task that we can do is not just looking at the sounds and the words, but we can also physically use the pictures either for a counting or a recognition activity or task. So in this reading, you can see that Dora is asking her friends, or actually it's Boots saying this, or Boots' friends, and they are saying, there are 7 sheep. There are 7 sheep. But the question is, are there really 7 sheep in this picture? Let's count together. So, as they are counting, you can realize that, wow, there aren't 7 sheep. You can see that there are actually 6 sheep. And where are these sheep at? And of course, your young learner or child can use their finger and point to all the different sheep. Why did we get 7? Oh, maybe your son or daughter pointed to this animal. This is not a sheep. It is a barn animal, and I believe it looks like a donkey, but we're looking for sheep. So once again, you can integrate, parents can do this in a very simple way, and it makes the reading activity not just looking at the words and not just focusing on the words, but allowing them to actually get more movement and really keeping the task simple and easy for them to adjust and do together. Now, our third tip is we want to make sure not only is the setting comfortable for them, not only are we challenging them with simple tasks and goals, but we also want to make sure after they read, how can we make this experience last? How can we keep this in their memory so they can return back to it in other readings or with rereadings of the same book? And how we can do this is let them explore what they've learned with that title or with that reader. Now, what we can do is a lot of readers come with these great activities that are in the back of the book, and a lot of parents allow their children to use crayons or markers, and they're able to actually do these activities to complete them as not an academic comprehension practice, but it's just to see, can they actually return back and recall the information that they actually read together. Now, remember, I told you earlier that I am based in Korea. Now, Korean parents, they have a big issue with story readers because once you actually do the activity once, it's already pre-marked on the book. So my personal tip is, laminate the pages for reusability. Now, what I mean by this is, hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is a very simple why is it not opening? Self-laminating paper. And you can buy these anywhere, and they have a sticky coating on the inside. So what I like to do is, for my action or for my activity portions, let me show you really quickly. I take these self-sticky portions, and what I do is, I actually put the self-sticky on the page itself. So as you can see, it's a sticky coating, and I just cut off and trim the bottom so it fits the pages. But what happens here is that now your paper actually has a lamination coating on it. So instead of using a pen, use any dry erase marker. And what they can do is they can do the activity in the book, and then when they're finished, you can erase it. And it becomes clear again, and it becomes reusable. Now, the reason why we do this is because many parents don't just have one child. They have a daughter or a son at different ages. And many parents are turned off by readers because they can't reuse it again. And like I mentioned earlier, I loved reading the same story over and over again. When I was younger, there was a story character, I'm not sure if you heard of her, but her name is Amelia Bedelia. She was my favorite character because she was so silly and made so many different mistakes, and I really liked doing the activities and rereading over again. And this way, it's a very, very simple way of allowing our students and children to get that reusability factor. Maybe they can find the activities faster, or do it more quickly, or you can ask them different points for them to actually participate after the reading exercise has been done. So that's just a personal tip for me, and hopefully it'll work out for everyone who is interested in reusing the readers and storybooks over and over again. Now, also, what we can do is having them not just reuse the storybooks, but allowing them to go back and allowing them to share their own opinions and thoughts about the story too. And you can do this in 3 simple ways. One is retelling the story by themselves, allowing them to share different details or even changing details. Instead of Dora being the main character, what if you were the main character? Tell me how you would do it differently. And they go, oh, well, Daddy, I wouldn't do that. I would do this instead. So you can allow your you can allow your children to be more creative and use their own experiences in this retelling. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are very, very fortunate in that recent times, even when I was younger in elementary school, there weren't a lot of resources available for our parents to actually use. Now, there are so many different places that we can find these extra things, extra little activities, and one of them that parents can use are these little handouts. Hopefully you guys can see I cut these little cutouts, and you can see that this is Dora. And this is my friend Boots. And of course, you can see that these can individually be a separate coloring activity. Now, in the States, they really like using popsicle sticks, but because I live in Korea, wooden chopsticks are everywhere. So I like to use wooden chopsticks as my placeholders. And what they can do is, you can reread the story again, but you're now the character. You can do a different voice. They can do a different voice. And what I liked about is that Mark earlier introduced us to our hand puppets, Dora and Boots. And earlier in our very first session, Vanessa actually used stuffed animals. You can take any of these types of props and reuse it as a storytelling technique to redo the story over again. I also use a bigger prop. This is my magnifying glass. So whenever we are looking for something, I will have my students or my child use a magnifying glass, and parents can use this over and over again as they're actually hunting or looking for different things in the pictures or even in the words while they're reading together. Now, hopefully you can see that these tips, once again, even though they are directed to the pre-primary and primary ages, you can still use these at any type of home environment. So before we do finish and wrap up our session, I have about half a minute left. I do want to make sure I give up 3 more major points at the very end. I do want to say that repetition is okay. It is okay to keep rereading the books and is recommended. We also want to make sure that parents feel comfortable that pace and speed are not important. Your child is going to have a different speed throughout each book, and it can change throughout each reader. But the idea is making sure they complete the story, complete the activities, and complete that active reading stage is the most important part. And finally, I cannot stress this more enough, making sure that this time is a time spent well with the bonding moments of a parent and child. Vanessa also mentioned a great point. The whole idea of hugging, being together, really makes this experience much more fulfilling and long-lasting as well.